I'm recording this in a motel room 60 miles east of the corridor. There's a tape recorder on the bedside table. Not my phone, not a digital file, a physical recorder with physical tape. Because after what happened, I don't trust anything that connects to a signal. The curtains are drawn. The door is bolted. I haven't slept in 2 days, and what I'm about to say is going to sound like the confession of a woman who lost her mind in the woods. It isn't. I wish it were. My name is Sera Hollowell. For 5 years, I was a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, specializing in avian population surveys across the central Appalachian range. For the past 2 years, I've been a seasonal caretaker and corridor monitor at a remote ranger posting in eastern Kentucky, assigned to a 14-mile stretch of old-growth forest that I cannot, for reasons I'll explain, leave. I need to say this at the beginning, because the beginning is where the lie lives, and the lie is the whole shape of everything that came after. I am a person who falsified data, professionally, on a federal survey. I signed my name to numbers I knew were wrong, and those numbers were used to delist an endangered species. And within 2 years, that species was functionally gone from the range it had lived in for 10,000 years. I didn't pull a trigger. I moved a decimal point. But the birds are gone, and my signature is on the paper that said they weren't. And I have spent every day since trying to understand how a person lives inside that fact without it eating them hollow. The reason I'm telling you about the birds before I tell you about the corridor is that the corridor knew. Not in the way a person knows, not through investigation or rumor or a personnel file. It knew the way a system knows when a term has been violated. It read the shape of me and found the lie already inside, the way you'd find a crack in a beam before the load comes down. I can't write any of this in the logbook. The logbook only accepts what I can verify, and I can no longer tell you with certainty which parts of the last 30 days were real in the way that word used to mean something to me. So I'm putting it here, on tape, in a motel room with the lights on. And I'm starting with the one thing I can verify. I lied, in the corridor, while carrying the handbook. And the corridor gave me exactly 30 days to correct the record. This is what happened inside those 30 days. I need to be specific about the lie, because specificity is all I have left. And because you need to understand the exact shape of the dishonesty the corridor found in me. In my 3rd year with Fish and Wildlife, I was assigned to a breeding population survey for the cerulean warbler, a small blue bird that nests in the upper canopy of old-growth deciduous forests in the central Appalachians. The survey was part of a 5-year status review that would determine whether the species retained its protected listing. My section covered a 60-mile transect in eastern Kentucky. I ran point counts. I recorded songs. I mapped territories. The numbers were low. Not catastrophically, not 0, but low enough that my section would have flagged the review. Low enough that the listing would likely have held, which meant the timber sales planned for that transect couldn't proceed, which meant the cooperative agreement between the agency and the State Forestry Division would have collapsed, which meant my supervisor's career would have taken a hit he'd told me, in so many words, he couldn't afford. He didn't tell me to change the numbers. He told me to review my methodology and reconsider whether my point count protocol was capturing the full population. He said it in a meeting, with a door closed, and I understood what he meant the way you understand a load rating, not as a suggestion, but as a structural fact. Change the numbers or the structure fails. So I changed them, not dramatically. I added 12 territories I hadn't confirmed. I upgraded 6 probable detections to confirmed. I signed the form. It went up the chain. The species was delisted 18 months later. 2 years after that, the transect was cut, and the cerulean warbler was gone from that range entirely. 12 territories. That's what I invented. 12 small lies, each one a bluebird that didn't exist, singing in a canopy that would be cut down because I said it didn't need them. I wasn't fired. I was investigated, and the investigation found procedural concerns, but no conclusive evidence of intentional falsification. Because I'd been careful with my methodology language, and because the agency wanted the result I'd given them. But I was moved, demoted in everything but title, transferred to a posting nobody wanted, in a forest nobody watched, doing work that required no data anyone would ever check. The corridor was my punishment. I took it the way you take a sentence. I thought the worst it could do to me was bore me to death on a ridge in Kentucky. I was thinking about the wrong kind of death. The assignment came through channels in late September, and it had the specific bureaucratic scent of a thing being handed off fast before someone could object to it. Seasonal caretaker, Kinneconic Corridor, Daniel Boone, National Forest. Solo posting. October through March. Housing provided. I met my supervisor at the district office in a town small enough that the Forest Service building doubled as a community meeting space. His name was Darden. Late 50s, wire glasses, hands that stayed flat on the desk the whole time we talked, like he was holding something down. He had a folder open with my transfer paperwork, and he went through it, efficiently radio schedule, supply drops, camera maintenance, water sampling, the bat survey equipment I'd be running monthly, all normal. All exactly the kind of busy work you hand to a biologist you want out of the way. Then he closed the folder and looked at me, and the quality of the look changed. "The handbook will be at the cabin," he said. "Read it your first night. All of it. Every page. Standard operating procedures?" Something like that. He aligned the folder's edges against the desk. "You'll radio in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Primary channel. If you miss a check-in, I'll drive up. If I drive up and you're not there, I'll call search and rescue. Understand?" Understood. He nodded. Then, without any change in tone, without any shift in his posture that would have told a reasonable person the next question was different from the ones before it. "Are you a truthful person, Sera?" I looked at him. He looked back. The question sat between us on the desk like something with weight. "I try to be," I said. "Try hard," he said, and moved on to logistics before I could ask him what he meant by it. He explained the fire road, the gate code, the cabin's generator schedule. He gave me a key ring with 4 keys and told me which lock each one opened. He mentioned, offhandedly, that the corridor had been hard to staff consistently, and that he appreciated my flexibility. He didn't say why it was hard to staff. He didn't explain why a routine caretaker posting in a national forest needed a truthfulness screening. And he shook my hand exactly the way he had at the start. Flat. Professional. Contained. Except his palm was damp now, and it hadn't been before. I drove in on a Tuesday afternoon, first week of October, with the light already going amber through the canopy. The fire road was gated at the forest boundary. A cable stretched between two steel posts with a combination lock. I punched the code Darden had given me and pulled through, and the road narrowed almost immediately from maintained gravel to something older and less certain. Clay and leaf, litter and ruts that held the morning's rain. The trees were enormous. I need you to understand that I am not a person who throws that word around. I've surveyed old growth across 3 states. I've stood in remnant stands with trees 400 years old. These were bigger. The canopy was so dense overhead that my GPS lost signal within a quarter mile of the gate, and the light that reached the road surface was green and directionless, the kind of light you get at depth in water. The corridor ran northeast to southwest along a river gorge. I could hear the water. Before I saw it, a constant white sound. Steady, masking. The kind of noise that would cover footsteps at any distance past 20 yards. The road followed the ridge above the gorge for 7 miles before it leveled out at a flat bench of ground. And there was the cabin. Log walls gone silver. Tin roof. A small generator shed to the west. A radio mast rising above the trees with guy wires that hummed in the wind. A covered porch with 2 rocking chairs and a split wood railing. It was well maintained, recently swept. Windows clean. Firewood stacked under a tarp. Someone had been here not long ago. On the kitchen table, centered under the window, was the handbook. A 3-ring binder. Green cover. Forest Service seal. It was open. Face down. Splayed at the spine, like someone had been reading it, and set it down mid-page to answer a knock at the door. The page it was open to was the last one. I set my bag on the floor and turned on the generator and lit the lamp and made coffee on the propane stove, and I sat down with the handbook the way I'd sat down with 100 field manuals before professionally, skeptically, ready to skim. I didn't skim. The first 30 pages were standard. Maps of the corridor with camera stations marked, water sampling protocols, radio frequencies, a maintenance calendar for the generator and the cabin's propane system, bat survey deployment instructions, the ultrasonic equipment, the SD cards, the analysis software on the hardened laptop they'd left for me. All of it clean, clear, federal issue. Then, past the maintenance section, past the maps, past everything that felt like a government document, there was a divider tab labeled Corridor Protocols, and behind it, a single typed page with 5 numbered rules. I read them with my biologist's eye, the part of me trained to spot methodology, to parse language for ambiguity, to ask whether a protocol was measuring what it claimed to measure. Here's what I found. Rule 1. All corridor cameras must be checked in the order listed on the maintenance map. Do not skip a camera. Do not reverse the order. If a camera is missing from its mount, log the absence, but do not search for it. I frowned at that. camera maintenance has a logical order. You follow the route that minimizes hiking distance. But the map showed a route that wound back on itself, hit cameras out of geographic sequence, doubled back twice. It was inefficient, deliberately so. I wrote inefficient in the margin, pencil, small, the way you mark a protocol you intend to improve. Rule 2. If bat survey equipment records a frequency below 8 kHz, delete the file immediately. Do not listen to it. Do not attempt to identify the source species. Log sub-threshold event and the timestamp only. That one made me pause. Bat echolocation operates above 20 kHz, well into the ultrasonic range. The equipment recorded down to 2 kHz as a byproduct of its sensitivity range, but anything below 8 kHz would be ambient noise. Wind, water, maybe large mammals vocalizing. Nothing worth keeping, sure, but nothing worth a rule forbidding you from listening to it. I wrote odd in the margin. Rule 3. Water samples from Junction C are to be collected between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. only. If the water at Junction C is clear outside those hours, do not touch it. Water at Junction C is not always water. I stopped writing in the margin. Rule 4. The corridor cabin logbook must be written in every night before 11 p.m. Every entry must be true. Do not write observations you cannot verify. Do not speculate. Do not lie in the logbook, even by omission. That one landed. Not because of the corridor. Because of me. Because I am a person who once wrote 12 false territories into a federal form. And here was a rule that said plainly, simply, without drama, do not lie in this book. It felt personal. I know it wasn't. I know a rule typed on a page years before my arrival couldn't have been written for me specifically. But it sat against my sternum the way a diagnosis does. Rule 5. If you hear footsteps on the fire road between midnight and 4 a.m., do not look out the north-facing window. You may look from the south window. What you see from the south window is accurate. What you would see from the north window is not. I read that one 3 times. Then I looked up from the handbook, and I looked at the cabin's north window, a simple double-hung 6 panes facing the fire road. And I looked at the south window opposite it. And I thought about what kind of institution writes a rule distinguishing between 2 views of the same event based on which direction you observe it from. I decided the answer was a bored one. A rural posting with too little oversight and too much folklore in the local culture. Someone had written their campfire stories into the protocol manual, and no one with authority had bothered to remove them. It happens. I'd seen weirder things in agency documents. I turned the page. The page behind the 5 rules was different. I noticed it before I read a word. The paper was heavier, thicker, a different stock entirely from the standard printer paper the rest of the handbook used. And it was older, not yellowed exactly, but dense with age, the way paper gets when it's been pressed flat for a very long time. The ink was different too. Not laser printed, not even typewritten, hand-lettered in a script that was careful and deliberate and bore no resemblance to the bureaucratic formatting of everything that came before it. Rule 6. This rule was not written by the National Park Service. If you have carried this handbook and spoken an untruth while in the corridor to a person, into a radio, or into the logbook, you have 30 days to correct the record. After 30 days, the correction is made for you. This provision is non-negotiable and predates your employment. I read it twice, then a third time, slower, parsing each clause the way I'd parse a contract. This rule was not written by the National Park Service. The document identified its own authorship as non-governmental. That's not something a prank does. That's not something folklore does. Folklore doesn't announce itself as non-institutional. It usually mimics institutional voice. This did the opposite. It separated itself, deliberately, from the authority of the rest of the handbook. 30 days to correct the record. A window, a grace period. Legal language. The kind of clause you find in a lease agreement or a compliance document, not in a ranger handbook. The correction is made for you. Passive voice. By whom? By what? The sentence refused to say, and the weight of that refusal, the deliberate omission of an agent, was the thing that finally made my professional brain stop dismissing and start cataloging. I touched the page. It was cold. The rest of the handbook was room temperature, the paper warm from the lamp, from the cabin's ambient heat. This page was cold. Not cool. Cold, the way something stored separately would be, the way something kept outside would be. I closed the handbook. I sat at the table with my coffee going cold and the generator humming behind me, and the corridor dark outside every window. And I told myself this was hazing, or a test, or the residue of some retired ranger's private religion left behind in the binder because no one cared enough to remove it. And the next morning, when I keyed my radio for the first check-in, and Darden asked, "Have you read and understood all handbook protocols?" I said, "Yes, copy. All protocols reviewed." I hadn't finished reading the last rule until an hour after that transmission. That was the lie. Small, procedural, the kind of untruth you say a dozen times a week in any job. Yes, I've read the manual. Yes, I've reviewed the policy. Yes, I understand. The kind of lie that costs nothing. In the corridor, nothing costs nothing. And the 30-day clock started ticking the moment my thumb came off the transmit key. For 6 days, the Kinneconic corridor was the most peaceful posting I'd ever held. I fell into the work the way water falls into a channel. Naturally, gratefully, without resistance. The camera route took most of a morning, following the prescribed order through the old growth along the ridgeline and down toward the gorge in a sequence that felt inefficient but gave my legs a rhythm. I'd check mounts, swap SD cards, log timestamps. The cameras showed what cameras in an old-growth forest should show. Deer at salt licks, a black bear turning over a log, a coyote pair moving through at dawn. Normal. Whole. Afternoons, I'd hike to the 3 creek junctions for water sampling. Junction A and B were straightforward, clear running water over sandstone. Junction C, the one the rule addressed, I visited at noon on the dot each time, collected my samples in the 4-hour window, and left. The water looked like water. It tasted like water in the field test kit. I began to feel foolish for having noticed the rule at all. Evenings, I'd process bat recordings on the laptop, log the day's observations, run the generator down, and write in the logbook by lamplight. True things, simple things, weather, wildlife sightings, maintenance completed. The pen moved easily. The entries were honest. I had nothing to lie about. I wrote, on the 4th night, corridor nominal. All stations checked, no anomalies. It was true. It was completely true. And I remember the ease of writing it. The simple pleasure of a sentence that didn't require me to calculate, to adjust, to decide what version of the truth served which master. Just a fact. Just what happened. The mornings were cold and beautiful fog in the gorge, the canopy going gold at the edges. The river sound constant and somehow comforting now that I'd gotten used to it. I drank coffee on the porch and watched the light move through the trees and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like a person who might eventually be able to live with what she'd done. That feeling was the trap. Not the corridor's trap, my own. The feeling of safety is the thing that makes you stop counting. I wasn't counting the days. On the 6th morning, a storm blew through overnight and dropped a hemlock across the fire road at the first camera station. The trunk was 3 feet across. I had a bow saw in the cabin, but nothing that would take that tree in less than half a day. The logical thing, the thing any field biologist would do, was to start the camera route from the far end instead, work backward, and clear the blowdown on my way home. So that's what I did. I hiked to camera 7, the farthest point, and worked my way back. Camera 7 was fine. Card full of normal footage. I swapped it, cleaned the lens, checked the mount. Camera 6, the same. Camera 5, and here I paused, because the card in camera 5 was fresh. Not the one I'd installed 3 days ago. A different card, same brand, but with a manufacturing date I didn't recognize from my supply. The lens was clean, not rain spattered, not dust covered. Spotless. Wiped. I checked camera 4. Same. Fresh card, clean lens, mount tightened with a half turn I hadn't given it. Someone had already serviced these cameras this morning, in the correct order. Starting from camera 1, the direction I should have gone, the direction the rule specified, and working forward along the route. They were ahead of me. They'd done the first 5 in sequence, while I was working backward from 7. I stood at camera 4 with the fresh SD card in my palm, and the forest very quiet around me, and I ran the logic. No other personnel were assigned to this corridor. Darden had made that clear solo posting, solo responsibility. The nearest other ranger station was a 2-hour drive. No one had authorization. No one had keys to the camera housings. And no one had the specific SD cards stored in my cabin's supply closet. I was supposed to walk behind whatever did this. The rule about order wasn't about efficiency. It was about sequence, about ensuring that whatever walked this route walked it first, and the ranger walked it after. And the two of them never occupied the same stretch of trail at the same time. I'd reversed the order. I'd walked into its active run from the wrong end. I turned around. I didn't run. Running felt wrong, the way running on a narrow trail always feels wrong, like the speed itself is an invitation. But I walked back toward the cabin with a pace that wasn't casual. And I kept the trail behind me in my peripheral vision the whole way. When I came up the porch steps, all 7 SD cards were stacked on the railing. Neat. Aligned. In the correct route order camera 1 through 7, bottom to top. Each one labeled in my own handwriting, because I'd labeled them from my supply before I installed them weeks ago. But these were the fresh cards, the ones that had been in the cameras this morning. All 7, collected, carried back to my cabin, and placed where I would find them. It had finished the route. For me. In order. And brought the work home. I sat on the porch for a long time with those cards in my hands. Then I took them inside and plugged them into the laptop, one at a time. Cameras 1 through 3 showed normal overnight wildlife. The expected footage, timestamps consistent. Camera 4 showed the same, but at the end of the recording, in the last 30 seconds of pre-dawn footage, there was motion at the far edge of the frame. Something tall, moving through the canopy-level darkness. I couldn't resolve it. The camera's infrared couldn't quite reach it. Just motion, fluid and unhurried, passing through. Cameras 5 through 7 each showed 2 motion events, one in the pre-dawn hour, consistent with the tall shape, and then a second, several hours later, showing me, my own back, walking away. Timestamp 7:40 a.m., 7:58 a.m., 8:15 a.m. The exact times I'd been at those stations. I'd been on its footage. It had walked the route in order, and its cameras had recorded me walking the route backward, directly toward it, at exactly the times when we must have been closest. That night, I opened the logbook and I wrote, "Route completed. No anomalies." The pen felt different this time. The lie felt different, because there had been anomalies, 7 of them, stacked on my porch railing, and I was choosing not to write them, because writing them would mean admitting something impossible. And admitting something impossible would mean the last rule was real. And the last rule being real would mean I'd been on a 30-day clock since my first morning here. I closed the book. The page sat there, drying, and I thought about Rule 4, do not lie in the logbook, even by omission. And I told myself that no anomalies was a matter of interpretation, not a lie. I've gotten very good at telling myself things like that. It's how 12 false territories get onto a federal form. 3 nights later, I was processing the monthly bat recordings at the kitchen table. The laptop screen blew in the dark cabin, headphones on, scrolling through spectrograms the way I'd done 100 times. The corridor had strong bat activity, big brown bats, eastern red bats, a solid Indiana bat population. That alone justified the survey work. The recordings were clean and routine, and I was half asleep in the good way, the way field data makes you when it's consistent, and your hands know the work. Then the software flagged a file. The spectrogram showed a recording from 2 nights ago, captured at the station nearest Junction C, timestamped 2:47 a.m. The frequency analysis put the primary signal at 6.2 kilohertz, well below the bat range, well below the 8 kilohertz threshold that Rule 2 named. I should have deleted it. Rule 2 was clear. If bat survey equipment records a frequency below 8 kilohertz, delete the file immediately. Do not listen to it. But I was a biologist, an unknown vocalizing species at 6.2 kilohertz in an old-growth Appalachian forest in October that could be half a dozen things, most of them documented, none of them dangerous. An owl at unusual frequency, a fox in distress, a bobcat, maybe. The rule was overcautious, obviously, written by the same superstitious predecessor who thought water stopped being water after 2 p.m. I told myself I'd listen to 3 seconds, just enough to speciate, just enough to satisfy the scientist in me, and then I'd delete it. I hit play. The sound that came through my headphones was not an owl, not a fox, not any animal vocalization I have ever heard in 20 years of field biology. It was structured, rhythmic, patterned in a way that made my trained ear do something it had never done before it tried to parse the sound as language. Not words, not speech as I understand it, but utterance with syntax, phrases with boundaries, a vocalization that repeated and varied the way meaningful communication repeats and varies, with internal structure that wasn't random. 3 seconds? That's all I heard. 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, something in the corridor spoke. And I recognized it as speech, the way you recognize a language. You don't speak, not by meaning, but by shape. I ripped the headphones off. My hands were shaking. The spectrogram was still scrolling on the screen, and I could see the waveform tight, organized. Nothing like ambient noise, nothing like any frequency profile in any database I'd ever accessed. I deleted the file. I closed the software. I logged sub-threshold event 2:47 a.m. Deleted per protocol. I sat in the dark cabin with my hands flat on the table, and I understood, finally, completely, that whatever I was sharing this corridor with was not an animal. It thought, it spoke, and the rules in the handbook weren't superstition. They were operational protocols for coexisting with an intelligent thing. I couldn't write it in the logbook. Rule 4 said, don't write what you can't verify. And what could I verify? That I'd heard something? That it sounded like language to a woman who's been alone in the woods for 6 days? A woman whose judgment has already been professionally questioned? So I wrote nothing. I omitted. And the omission was another lie. And the 30-day clock, which I'd spent 6 days not counting, ticked down 1 more day. 3 days later, Darden's truck came up the fire road unannounced. I heard it from the porch, the distant grind of tires on clay, the engine laboring up the switchbacks. It was a Thursday, not a scheduled supply day, and the sound of an unplanned vehicle in the corridor felt like a hand on my shoulder in an empty room. He parked at the generator shed and came up the steps with a thermos and a tight expression he was trying to keep professional. He said, "Good morning." He said he was doing a routine mid-season check. He said the district wanted eyes on the cabin's propane levels and the radio mast's guy wires. None of that was why he was here. He checked the propane. He checked the guy wires. Then he came inside, sat at my kitchen table, poured coffee from his thermos, and opened the logbook. I watched him read. His eyes moved down the entries. My careful, truthful, dry entries, and something in his shoulders eased at the normal ones and tightened at no anomalies. He lingered on that line. Then he closed the book and looked at me. "Anything you've chosen not to log?" "No," I said. And that was lie number 2. He watched me say it. He didn't challenge it, but something in his expression settled into the specific resignation of a man who's heard that answer before from other people in this same chair. "Let me tell you about Junction C," he said. He told me about a ranger named Falk, 2 rotations before mine. Falk was a hydrologist, a waterman, precise and methodical. On an evening in late November, hiking back from his sampling route, He'd stopped at Junction C to refill his canteen. It was past 4, outside the collection window. The water was clear. It looked like water. Back at the cabin, he tried to pour a drink. The water wouldn't leave the canteen. It clung to the rim. It stretched toward his hand against gravity, visibly, deliberately, reaching for his skin. He dropped the canteen. It hit the floor and the liquid came out then, but not down, toward him, across the floorboards, pooling against his boot. Falk left the corridor that night, drove out in the dark, never came back, never filed a report. Darden only knew because Falk had called him from a gas station at 3 a.m, shaking so hard he could barely speak. The water at Junction C isn't water after 2, Darden said, and it isn't water before 10. The window exists because something else uses that spot, and the hours in between are a courtesy, a shared use agreement. He said those words, shared use agreement, with the specific weight of a man who means them literally. The handbook isn't ours, Sera. It's shared. Both parties agreed to it. Both parties enforce it. He stood. He rinsed his thermos cup in my sink. And before he walked to the door, he turned back. Have you been truthful in the corridor, Sera? The question hit the same bruise as before, the same bruise as always. Yes, I said. Lie number 3, the easiest one, the one that cost the most. He looked at me the way you look at a load you've just calculated and found wanting. Then he left. He drove down the fire road before the light got low, checking his watch at the tree line, the same way a man checks the time before a deadline. The morning after Darden's visit, I opened the logbook to write my daily entry and discovered that last night's page was gone. Not torn out, gone. The binding was smooth, the page count seamless, as if the page had never existed. I counted the remaining sheets. They were consistent with a book that had never held the entry I'd written 8 hours ago. I'd written it. I'd watched the ink dry. And now the book denied it had ever been there. I flipped back. 2 more entries from the previous week. Both days I'd written, no anomalies. We're missing the same way. Smooth binding. No stubs. No torn edges. The book had closed around the gap, like water closing over a dropped stone. My words were being taken, collected. Something opened this book in the night and removed the pages I'd written, and the book healed itself behind the removal, as if to prevent me from proving it had happened. I sat at the table for a long time with the logbook open in front of me and my hands flat and still. And I thought about Rule 4. Every entry must be true. Do not lie in the logbook, even by omission. I'd written no anomalies 3 times, each one a lie, each one taken. Something was reading my entries, collecting them, checking them against what it knew to be true, because it was there in the corridor, every night, walking the camera route in order, focalizing at 6.2 kilohertz, sitting at Junction C in the hours that belonged to it. It knew what happened. It knew what I'd omitted. The logbook wasn't a record. It was a communication channel. And I'd been lying into it. That afternoon, I searched the cabin, methodically, the way I'd survey a transect, every drawer, every shelf, every cabinet. In the back of the closet in the radio room, behind a box of replacement antenna cable, I found a locked drawer set into the desk. The smallest key on my ring fit it. Inside, 3 logbooks, older, water-stained at the edges. The oldest dated back 12 years. I brought them to the table and read backward through a decade of handwriting. Most of it was what you'd expect: weather, camera logs, sample results, consistent, careful, true. But every logbook, I noticed, had a section where the handwriting changed. Not gradually, abruptly. Mid-season, mid-page, sometimes one hand ending, a different hand beginning the very next entry. No transfer notes, no new caretaker arriving annotations, just silence, and then a stranger's writing. I counted the changes. 7. 7 times in 12 years, a person stopped writing in the corridor's logbook, and someone else started. No explanations, no farewells. Just one hand replaced by another, the way mine would be replaced if I stopped. I went back to the last entry before each handwriting change, and I found the thing that put me flat against the chair back with my chest tight. In every case, every single one, the final entry written by the departing hand contained something unverifiable, a speculation, a guess, an observation qualified with "I think," or "it seemed like," or "possibly." Something that broke Rule 4's demand for verifiable truth. In one case, a single sentence: "I believe something is using the corridor at night." Believe. Not observed. Not confirmed. Believe a word that can't be verified. A truth claim without evidence. And after that sentence, a new hand. A new ranger. No explanation of where the previous one went. 7 people had been removed from this corridor. Cleanly. Administratively. Without record. And every one of them had made their last entry a sentence that couldn't be verified. The logbook didn't just accept truth, it enforced it. And the enforcement was disappearance. I counted backward that night with a pen and my supply calendar. My first radio lie, all protocols reviewed, had been transmitted 26 days ago. 4 days remained in the 30-day window. I knew now. I knew the clock was real. I knew what happened to people who lied in the corridor and didn't correct it. And I knew, with the specific clarity of a woman who has watched 7 handwriting changes stop mid-sentence, that I needed to fix this. I keyed the radio at 6 a.m. before my scheduled check-in, and I pressed the transmit button and I said, "Dispatch, this is Kinneconic Corridor. Correction to initial check-in." On my first morning, I confirmed all protocols reviewed. That was inaccurate. I had not yet finished reading the handbook at the time of that transmission. Correcting the record now. Static. Clean, flat static. No crackle of acknowledgement. No dispatch response. I tried again. Same dead air. The radio was transmitting the indicator light, confirmed it, but nothing was reaching the other end, or nothing was being allowed to reach the other end. I tried the logbook next. I sat down and wrote, carefully, precisely. Correction. On date, I transmitted confirmation of full protocol review before completing the handbook. This entry corrects that omission. In the morning, the page was blank. Not taken blank. The ink was gone. The page was there, smooth and empty, as if I'd never written on it. The logbook wouldn't carry it. I wrote it again. Slower, more carefully. Same result by morning blank paper. No ink. The words refused. 3 days left, and every channel I tried to use for the correction was sealed shut. I reread Rule 6, word by word, looking for the thing I was missing. Correct the record. Not confess. Not apologize. Not transmit a correction to dispatch. Correct the record. The record was the logbook. The correction wasn't telling someone I'd lied. It was writing the truth I'd omitted. Not a meta-statement about having lied, but the actual truth. The real observations. The real anomalies. Everything I'd left out of every entry marked no anomalies. The logbook wanted the data I'd withheld. It wanted me to write down what I'd really seen. All of it. Truthfully. Into the book that something takes and reads. That night, past midnight, I heard footsteps on the fire road. Slow. Rhythmic. The heavy, unhurried cadence of something large, walking packed clay. I was at the desk, awake, trying to figure out how to write a correction the logbook would accept. And the sound came through the north wall, so clearly it might have been in the room. I went to the window, the closest one, the north window. I looked out before I remembered. Half a second. That's all I saw before my hand found the curtain and pulled it shut. But half a second was enough. On the fire road, in the dark, lit by nothing I could identify as a light source, there was a woman walking. She wore my jacket, my boots. She carried my pack, the one hanging on the hook behind me right now. She walked with my gait, the specific slight hitch in my left stride from an old field injury. She was moving away from the cabin, toward the corridor exit, toward out. I backed away from the glass. My own hands were in front of me. My own body was in this room. And the thing on the fire road was also me, complete and unhesitating, and walking away with a certainty I didn't have. Rule 5. What you see from the south window is accurate. What you would see from the north window is not accurate. The figure wasn't real. But it was the corridor's model of me, the entity's understanding of what I was, or what I would become, or what it intended for me. Seeing yourself from outside is the specific horror of being observed by something that has formed an opinion. From the fire road, the real one, the one I could see through the south window, when I forced myself to cross the room and look, I heard the footsteps stop, as if something had felt me looking and paused. The south window showed nothing. Empty road. Empty dark. Whatever walked out there knew which window I'd used, and had stopped performing for the one that would show it true. 2 days left, and the corridor had shown me my own departure. Dawn of day 30 broke gray and cold, and I spent the morning sitting at the table with the handbook open to Rule 6, reading the same line over and over until the words lost their edges. Correct the record. The record was the logbook. The correction was truth, not confession, not apology, but the actual observations I'd omitted. I had to write what I'd really seen in this corridor. The serviced cameras, the sub-threshold vocalization, the cards on my railing, the fog pattern at Junction C, the north window figure, all of it. Written as verified observation, not speculation, not hedged with "I believe" or "it seemed," because Rule 4 forbade unverifiable claims, and Rule 6 demanded the record be corrected within it. I had to write impossible things as verified fact, and I had to do it before midnight. I understood, sitting there in the gray morning light, what this actually required of me. Not courage, not confession, commitment. I had to commit, on paper, in a document that something takes and reads and judges, to the truth that this corridor is occupied by an intelligent, non-human entity that shares it with me under terms. I had to write that as fact. Not theory, not belief, fact. For a biologist, writing an unverified claim as verified fact is the thing that ended my career. It's the exact sin I committed with the warbler data. But this time, the claim was true. And that difference, that single inversion, was the cruelest joke the corridor could have played on me. I'd lied on paper and called it true. Now I had to tell the truth on paper and treat it as data. I sat down at 4 p.m. with the logbook open to a fresh page, and I began writing. I wrote everything. I wrote about the reversed camera route, the fresh SD cards, the footage showing my own back at stations I'd visited out of order. I wrote about the sub-threshold recording, 6.2 kilohertz, structured vocalization, syntactic patterning, consistent with communicative intent. I wrote it in the language of field observation. I dated it. I timed it. I wrote it the way I should have written it weeks ago, if I hadn't been afraid of what it meant. The pages stayed. For the first time since the blank rejections, my ink held on the paper. The logbook was accepting the entries. They weren't disappearing. The truth stuck. I wrote about Junction C, about the water sample I'd collected at 1:58 p.m. one afternoon, technically inside the window, but late enough that I'd noticed a faint viscosity in the sample that I'd attributed to dissolved minerals and not logged. I wrote about the viscosity. I described it precisely. I noted that it had resolved by the time I reached the cabin, the sample reading normal in all tests, as if whatever property the liquid held at the junction evaporated once removed from the site. Outside, the light was going. Earlier than it should have, the canopy had been thick all season, but tonight the darkness seemed to arrive from below, rising up the gorge, filling the bowl of the corridor, like water filling a basin. The temperature in the cabin dropped by degrees. My breath didn't fog quite, but I could feel the cold against my teeth. I kept writing. The north window. The figure. My own shape on the fire road, walking toward the exit, seen through the wrong glass. I described it as observation, observed through the north-facing window at approximately 0:15. And I noted that Rule 5 designates north window observations as inaccurate representations, and I recorded it anyway, because the observation itself was true, even if its content was not. The river sound was rising, not gradually in steps, each one louder than the last, as if the water level were climbing, as if the gorge were filling. The generator's hum took on a labored note. The lamp flickered, and through the walls of the cabin, I could feel something I had no instrument to measure. A tension. The weight of being watched by something that was reading in real time, following my pen across the page the way you'd follow a conversation, leaning closer with every line. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The clock on the wall read 11:16. The last thing I wrote was not about the corridor. At 11:41, with the river roaring against the cabin's foundation, and the cold so deep I could see my breath now, I turned to a fresh page, and I wrote the cerulean warbler data. I wrote the real numbers. 12 territories I'd invented. 6 upgrades from probable to confirmed that I'd made without evidence. I wrote the transect, the dates, the methodology I'd actually used versus the methodology I'd reported. I wrote it into the corridor's logbook, into the book that something takes and reads, because Rule 4 said, "Do not lie, even by omission." And my entire professional life was an omission I'd carried into this territory for 30 days. I wrote it as verified fact, because it was. I verified it. I was there. I know what I counted and what I didn't. My hand shook. The pen skipped twice. I had to stop and breathe and press the tip more firmly. Outside, the footsteps were on the fire road again. Not walking away this time. Not the departing figure I'd seen through the north window. These were coming toward the cabin. Heavy, slow, patient. The sound of something that had been waiting for exactly this. 11:58. 2 minutes. I wrote the last sentence. This entry corrects all prior omissions, both within this corridor and within my professional record. The observations logged above are true and verified by direct experience. I have no further record to correct. My pen lifted from the page at 11:59. The footsteps stopped at the porch. The cabin was very cold and very still. I sat with my hands flat on the table on either side of the open logbook, and I did not move. The page I'd just written was still there, still visible, ink still dark, not fading, not blanking. It held. And from the porch, through the door, through the walls, I heard a sound I'd only ever heard on the BAT equipment. A low, structured vocalization, below 8 kilohertz, with the cadence of language. It spoke one thing, one concept, one single utterance that I felt in my chest cavity before my ears processed it, that made my hands stop trembling, and my lungs fill all the way for the first time in hours. I don't know what it said. I will never know what it said. But my body knew, the way your body knows when a weight has been set down. The logbook page, the one full of impossible truths and professional confessions, was already gone when I looked down. Taken, accepted, without tearing. The cold receded. The river sound dropped to its normal register. The footsteps withdrew from the porch, not running, not retreating, simply moving away, the way a person leaves a counter after their business is done. I sat in the warming cabin for a long time, listening to the generator steady itself, listening to the river go quiet, listening to the ordinary sounds of the forest coming back online the way a system reboots after a power surge. The clock read 12:03, 3 minutes past midnight, 3 minutes into day 31. The correction had been made, by me, within the window. I understood now, in the aftermath, what the 30 days had actually been. Not a threat, a term, a clause in an agreement between two parties that shared territory under specific conditions, the primary condition being truth. The entity, whatever it was, however long it had been in this gorge, had agreed to share 14 miles of old growth with a rotating series of human caretakers. And its single, non-negotiable demand was that those caretakers be honest while in its space. Not good, not brave, not kind. Honest. The rangers who disappeared the 7 handwriting changes weren't killed. They were corrected. They'd failed to fix their lies within the window, and the entity had enforced the term its own way, made the correction for them. And Darden's specific, careful question, "Are you a truthful person?" wasn't screening for virtue. It was screening for survival likelihood. I could still feel the vocalization in my ribs. Not as sound anymore, but as settled fact, the way a joint feels after it's been reset. Something that was wrong, now right. Something that was owed, now paid. In the morning, the logbook was whole. Every page present, every entry accounted for, including the ones that had been blank or missing over the past weeks. They were back, but altered. Where I'd written, "no anomalies," the entries now read differently in my handwriting, but corrected, as if the logbook had rewritten itself to match the truth I'd finally provided. And at the back of the book, after my last entry, a new page had been added. The same thick paper, the same old ink, the same careful hand that had written Rule 6. One line, record corrected, occupancy continues, term indefinite. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. They were what they were. I was no longer a seasonal caretaker on a 6-month posting. I had been accepted into the corridor's agreement permanently. Not as punishment, not exactly as reward. As consequence, I had told the truth into its book. I had provided it with the full record, voluntarily, within the window it offered. And in doing so, I had become a party to the contract the same way every successful ranger before me had. The ones who lied were removed, corrected into the corridor, absorbed, gone. The ones who corrected were retained, kept, made permanent. I picked up the radio and called Darden. He answered on the first ring. "It wrote back," I said. A long pause, then, "Good. That means you stay." "How many have gotten the right back?" 4 in 30 years. "And the others?" He was quiet. I could hear him breathing, and the breathing was the sound of a man deciding how much truth to put into a sentence. "The correction was made for them," he said finally. "What does that mean, Darden? Specifically?" "They're still in the corridor." His voice was very level. "They're just not in the cabin anymore. The footsteps on the fire road, the figure in the north window, the shape that walked the camera route in the dark, servicing the stations in correct order. Those were the previous caretakers. The ones who lied and didn't fix it. The ones whose handwriting just stopped one day. They were still here, still walking the route, still in the corridor, but not as people, as terms, as consequences, as permanent, honest parts of a territory that couldn't tolerate lies. I hung up the phone and stood at the south window, the accurate one, and I looked at the corridor, the old growth stretching in both directions, the gorge, the river, the fire road cutting its line through the green. Beautiful. The most beautiful place I've ever worked. And full of people. 7 of them, at least. Walking the routes they walked in life. Maintaining the cameras they maintained. Following the order they followed. Unable to leave because they'd been made permanent by their own dishonesty. The footsteps I heard at night weren't threatening me. They were doing their jobs. They'd always been doing their jobs. The corridor just wouldn't let them stop. I thought about Falk, the hydrologist who touched the water and ran. He'd gotten out because he hadn't lied. He'd broken a rule, yes, collected outside the window, but he hadn't been dishonest about it. He'd felt the wrongness, and he'd fled. And fleeing is permitted. Only lying isn't. I thought about the cerulean warbler, functionally extinct in its range because of 12 territories I'd written onto a form. And now I'd written the truth of those 12 territories into a different book, a book that something ancient takes and reads and holds as binding. I don't know if that changes anything in the world outside this corridor. I don't know if the birds come back because I finally said they were gone. But the record is corrected now, in the only ledger that seems to care about accuracy enough to enforce it. That should feel like absolution. Some days it does. It's been 2 years. I run the camera route every morning in the prescribed order. I write the logbook every night, truthful, precise, never speculative. I have heard the sub-threshold vocalizations many times since that night.